Just getting a tap tone on the instrument so that when I'm done I can kind of compare it and make sure I'm close. It's a big tap tone. Kind of hear how the drum is kind of uneven. And I lost all the footage of taking the head off, so I'm going to go right to removing the dowel and taking the neck nut off. It's interesting how the neck nut is brass. I'm not sure why it's brass. Pull the dowel out. And gently just pull the neck off there. It came off very easily. I'd already taped up the fingerboard before I started shooting, but there's quite a bit of corrosion and oxidation on there. Probably sweat, salt, stuff like that. So steel wool is going to have to happen. You can see the first couple frets have a little indentation on them, but there's no need to level anything, so I think I'm just going to polish them. They're pretty, you can't really tell in the video, but they're pretty dull. And there's a lot of oxidation spots on them, so getting with the steel wool, just trying to get all this stuff off. Lots and lots of polishing on that chrome, and there's still some stains in the chrome, but steel wool did a pretty good job. I'm not sure if there is a way to get rid of those deep stains. I mean, I'm going to get it pretty shiny and pretty reflective, but there's still spots where you can see it just won't go away. You're taking out the tension hoop, counter tension hoop. It seemed rattly right away, so I was going to be careful that I wasn't going to scratch the finish with a loose screw. And none of that. Those aren't scratches. That's actually just more oxidation from where the chrome was touching the ring, and like more sweat, salt and stuff. And there's my rattler right there. But luckily the screw wasn't sticking out, so I didn't scratch the finish on the way out. Just remove all these guys. So much fun. Underneath each one of the brackets, it looks like there's more oxidation, so it looks like there was moisture getting underneath between the tension studs and the bracket. You can see a lot of spots there, and it's pretty much all like sweat or oils from your hands and whatnot. Some of that pitting never comes out. Similarly on some of my drums, I've done the same thing, steel wool it over and over again. Sometimes those things just never come out. Either have to grind it down, replate it, or that's the stain right there that I'm talking about. I don't know how to get that out. More steel wool. It's looking a lot better, a lot smoother, at least to the touch. Going to put all the hardware into a degreaser solution. Clean it as much as possible. There's a lot of the same oxidation stuck on the thread, so I spent some time running the nuts through the threads of the bolts to get all the oxidation out. And that degreaser helped quite a bit doing that. Degreaser cuts down all that organic matter in there. There's that big stain on there. Didn't want to use any steel wool, obviously, on the finish, so did the degreaser solution on the outside of the ring just to give it a nice clean, and it cleaned up pretty nice. There is some oxidation, so this is steel wool on the bearing edge where the head goes, and was able to get a lot of the stuff on the outside, but there was some oxidation on the bearing edge of the actual tone ring that won't come off, and you can see it there. It's actually smooth to the touch, but you can see where that pitting is starting. So I'm just going to give the frets a polish, starting with the fret erasers. It's a very fine grit, but it is an abrasive, so just taking some of the oxidation off of there. Then I'll hit it with some steel wool, and pretty much you could just leave it with just steel wool. I mean, it would be great with just the fret eraser, with the mild grit, the fine grit, and then the steel wool. The frets are going to polish up. They're going to look good, but I wanted to use the Dremel to do the polish wheel. So it was an extra step, but I think it's worth it. I like how detailed you can get with the Dremel. So there's with the steel wool. It's passable. One little extra on some of the dirtier frets, but I mean that's passable. It's pretty good, and it's hard to tell in the video. But after you hit it with the polish wheel, it's it's like, oh, it wasn't even shiny before, kind of thing. So lots and lots of steel wool. It's more of like a jewelry polish wheel, but it works really great on frets. A little too slow on the motor there. If you push too hard with this polish wheel, it will leave residue behind of the polish wheel, so you're gonna be really delicate with this. Lasers. Some spaceship sounds there. That's cool. And you know, some of the pitting and oxidation on the inside of some of these frets wasn't really coming off, and it's just gonna have to. There's so much fret material left, you don't have to worry about refretting it, but there is just, you know, normal oxidation on the steel fret. So taking all the hardware out of the degreaser bath, rinsing it off, drying it on paper towels here. Hardware by and large is really good. The plating is still really good. There's not much pitting and oxidation on the hardware pieces. There is one of the brackets is bored out deeper in the countersink than the other ones, and I think that's the one that had the loose bracket retainer on it before. So I did my best to flatten these out and really get them as snug as I could before putting it back on. And eventually something probably will loosen up down the road from vibration and everything, but here I'm putting the counter hoop against the tension hoop so that I can keep the bracket retainers as flat as possible when I tighten them up. Put that counter hoop back on there. Very gently, hoping that none of the screws are popping out and sticking out, and I'm not hearing any scratches against that finish. And very carefully, and I didn't hear anything, so there we go. A little nerve-wracking on that one. Put the neck back on. The two screws sort of need a little bit of coaxing. Get parallel because the poles are not exactly parallel through the banjo. There's also quite a few marks on the fingerboard of super glue, as if some of the frets had been glued down, and there's a kind of a mark in the middle of the fingerboard. I'll have to show you at some point. That looks like it was scraped from spillover from super glue. I didn't touch it, I didn't do anything to it, but it could be scraped off. It's subtle, it's not going to affect how it plays. It was only noticeable when I took everything off and tried to oil it up. So put the neck nut back on, putting the dowel. I left the dowel nut exactly where it was before. I taped it down, so when I put the dowel back on, I knew exactly where that nut was supposed to be, so that we're not warping the ring at all. The ring will be exactly the same size it was when I took it apart. Put the tension hoops back on there, putting the brackets on there. It's tedious, but you know, it's kind of fun. Gonna zen out, listen to some music. You can almost hear a tone starting on the head just from finger tension. There's so many brackets on a banjo, it's interesting. You get a tap tone just finger tightening each bracket, so tuning is actually much easier. I expected this to be really complicated because there's so many more brackets, but the more brackets that you have, it seems the easier it is to tune, so much more than a drum. It's definitely something I learned. It was very interesting. As I'm going up, the head is really staying balanced within itself, and something that drums don't do very well. You usually have to fine-tune each bracket point to get it really to lock into itself, and the head was really starting to balance, so I just went quarter turns all the way around the ring, and the tap tone was pretty solid at that point. Wasn't quite a G sharp.
Almost first try. It's halfway between G and G sharp.
So I just went another quarter turn all the way around the whole ring to see if it can get up to another quarter tone or a little bit more than that. And luckily it was like right on, so there you go, 2 times around the ring, quarter turns, gets you G sharp. You don't have to try. Here I'm fine tuning it, so I'm muting the middle of the head so that I just hear the overtones, and then I can hear better which bracket is tighter and which one's looser. And that whole side next to the neck is a little bit looser, so I'm going to spend some time. You can kind of hear the tap tones a little bit lower, so we're going to, and you don't only crank the one next to it, you crank the one opposite it too, so a little bit of a star pattern. And it's a little bit sharp from G sharp right now, so I'm pushing it down a little bit, but the head is balanced to itself, which is much more important than necessarily nailing G sharp. And also, the tension of the bridge is going to start putting tension down on the head, and the head's going to relax a little bit, so I usually like to start things a little bit sharp. It gives it a little bit of room to relax. Fingerboard looks pretty thirsty. There's that spot I was talking about with the Subaru mark. We're going to see if the oil has any effect on that. I don't think it will, but not the most thirsty fingerboard I've ever seen, but it was pretty thirsty. This will also help keep the oxidation and corrosion that's happening on the fret wires to slow down a little bit. Seal them in there a little bit. Bridge is looking really good. Didn't have to do anything or replace it. These GHS strings are a little oxidized. Should get some new strings on there for you. These worked well to set it up. And it was the same gauge you were using before, so the neck should be responding. And I didn't film it, but I actually adjusted the truss rod just a tiny bit. Just to flatten it out a little bit. It wasn't quite as flat as it could be. And fast forward to a couple days later, and I was able to get into the wood shop and mark out these spikes, just using a little plastic shim to make sure I'm the same distance from the fret wire. And using a finish nail to mark those holes, and now I'm going to use I'm not sure what this bit is. I measured it with a micrometer, and it was the same diameter as the railroad spike. So, and then I flattened out the spikes with some pliers to make them a little bit larger than this hole, so they would wedge themselves in there. And the railroad spikes have barbs on them, sort of, so they're sort of will grab onto that wood. I just drilled down until I saw some white wood come up. There's, you get through the ebony, you see all the black chips come up, and then the white wood from the maple neck comes through, and time to stop. Time to stop drilling. Nip off the end there, and after you nip off the end, there's a little burr on there, so I'm going to do my best to get all the sharp corners off the edge of those. This file wasn't really doing it, but eventually it got it off there, and then I hit it with some 400 grit sandpaper just to smooth it out, and put that 16 thousandth feeler gauge there underneath, so the spike doesn't go all the way down into the fingerboard, and you have enough room for a 16,000th string. But in the end, actually, even though it says 16,000th, your top string is a G, which is a 09, and it sticks in there. So I'm glad I didn't go smaller. I was about to pull out a 12,000th or a 10,000th, and I'm glad I didn't do that because 16,000 ended up being perfect. Filing down the second spike just a bit, and that was the most careful filing I've ever done in my entire life. Maybe that was the most nerve-wracking. Just filing down that one because the two spikes are at the same height, and spikes are gonna buzz on each other if I don't. That spike's sounding like it's buzzing on the other ones, but it actually is not when we pick it up and play it. And those spikes are not buzzing on each other. Sounded good. Can't wait to hear you play it, man.